and welcome to Shaka Extra Time, a show that comes to you every Tuesday. Joining me from his home in Arlington, Virginia is Shaka Sali himself, aka the Kabale Kid. Hello, Shaka.
Hello, Paul.
How are you?
I remain simple, easy, and as some of my fans have suggested, an awesome son of Africa.
Shaka, let's begin off by maybe looking at what's happening globally, but perhaps let's start here in the United States. The government lockdown or the states lockdown seems to be, most states seem to be easing the lockdown, but the coronavirus cases seem to be going up. In fact, according to your thoughts, Shaka.
You know, Paul, unfortunately, that really was expected. There are three important T's that public health officials, doctors, and scientists always talk about before you even begin to dream about easing the lockdown. They talk about testing, they talk about tracing, they talk about treatment. So you really have to have adequate, if not sufficient, testing, tracing, so that you can isolate some of those people who may be infected, and then, of course, the ability to be able to treat. So far, those three T's don't seem, frankly, to be pretty much on the radar. There are some parts of the countries, especially some states like New York, which, of course, as you know, initially used to be the epicenter of the United States, neighboring New Jersey and what have you. They seem to have actually done the right thing. And they seem to be not only to have plateaued, but in fact, they have even gone on the curve. They are coming down. Whereas some of the states in the Midwest and southern parts of the United States, like Texas, they seem to be climbing up. They seem to be spiking. I have often said that when you talk about this COVID-19 or the coronavirus pandemic, you should listen less to politicians, to propagandists. You should rather listen to public health experts, doctors with real clinics, not like me, scientists. Those types of people, because they are guided by data. In some other places, they call it data. They are guided by science. They are guided by facts. And all those things come into play, especially when you base them on the ability to test people, the ability to trace some of the people that may have been infected, and also, of course, finally, the ability to treat. But as we talk, you do not have as yet a cure, nor do you have a vaccine, nor do you, in fact, have what you would call comfortably an effective therapy or treatment.
Shaka, you brought up some very good points especially when you talked about the three T's, tasting, tracing, and treatment. But there are some people or critics who have said that perhaps, for example, the president of Tanzania dismissed the science behind the testing of coronavirus because, according to his scientists in Tanzania, they tested some goats, some pawpaws, some other animals, and they all tested positive. And based on that, he said that maybe this was the wrong thing. Either that the testing kits that they had purchased from the Western world were faulty, and therefore he was not going to allow his country to go down the trail, follow what was happening all over Africa, across the region, and here in the United States, where people were literally saying that, you know what, everything has to come to a halt. People have to stay home. if you don't feel good, self-quarantine. He said, no, is the Republic of Tanzania out of danger as you know it, Shaka?
You know, Paul, one thing that by now you probably know about me, I have never, ever, not even for a second, or a minute, or an hour, ever claimed to be an ally of science or a scientist for that matter. But when people who are experts in science talk about what needs to be done, what is oxygen, I have no choice but to agree. And especially for the president of Tanzania, John Pombe Magufuli, a man that I read, if I read correctly, happens in fact to be a recipient of a Doctor of Philosophy degree in chemistry. Surely he should know better than those others that have the distinction perhaps of being political science experts. The fact of the matter is, we do know that the virus is not limited to Tanzania. The virus is global. There is evidence, for example, that some of the countries in the neighborhood of Tanzania, where Tanzania is located, have actually been complaining. Uganda, for example.
And Kenya.
Kenya. They have been complaining about the trucks that come from the United Republic of Tanzania. The CDC Africa itself, based in Addis Ababa, the Ethiopian capital, has diplomatically been complaining about not receiving data, not receiving any statistics regarding the status of the COVID-19 in Tanzania. The World Health Organization has also been complaining to some degree. And we also know for a fact that some countries that have been following essentially the prescribed measures that need to be taken in order for countries to avoid being defeated by the virus, short of a cure, a vaccine, and an effective treatment, that these people have embarked on social distancing. They embarked on lockdowns much, much earlier, and they have succeeded, in fact, in the sense that some of them, and there are very few, have in fact declared victory. In Africa, you have a country called Mauritius in the Indian Ocean, a member of the same regional organization as Tanzania, even though Tanzania is both a member of SADC, the Southern African Development Community, and also the East African Community. But Tanzania, a member of SADC, is in the same club as Mauritius. Mauritius has in fact declared victory, and there is evidence to boot. When you go to some other places, you can also look at a country called New Zealand. New Zealand has also declared victory. And in New Zealand, there is evidence to boot. And part of the reason is they were able to do the needful, which Tanzania seems to have ignored. So I honestly find it difficult to believe that Tanzania is free of COVID-19.
The last 2 weeks have been something that a lot of historians would say fundamentally changed the way United States looks at race and how police has been treating African Americans. As we speak today, we have demonstrations still going on across the country, but at the same time, this has been an opportunity for people from across the aisle, blacks and whites and other races, to have a serious conversation in United States regarding how police treats African American people, regarding how police is doing their job in this country. As we speak, there seems to be a movement that is geared towards having that conversation. You've been watching stuff, you've been analyzing some of these situations. Maybe help us understand what's going on in the United States.
It is incredible. You just have to go back to the words of a man that is largely referred to as the conscience of America, and that is the late Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He once said that riots and protests are the languages of the unheard. Apparently, it seems like, at least this time around, that language is actually getting traction. It's not only getting traction to or among the American people, as indicated through public opinion polls, for example. Public opinion polls are north of 70, north of 70%, saying that the murder, some might say the lynching of George Floyd in Minneapolis, Minnesota, on May 25th, was actually not something that you could simply limit to George Floyd. It was something that had broader social, economic, political implications for America. And as you have already seen, when you look at some of the protests, if not most of them, true, a lot of them are pretty much, it would seem, led by Black people or African Americans. But for the most part, you will also find that these protests have increasingly become very socially, culturally, and racially diverse. You're talking about Black, white, you're talking about brown people, you're talking about women, you're talking about different demographics reflected in those protests.
Right.
And by the way, sometimes some people who live in democratically challenged countries, when they hear the word or the concept of protest, it rings something negative. But that is something very positive in the context of the United States of America.
Correct.
As a matter of fact, this country here was born on the basis of protests. And its constitution allows protests as something that is very fundamental to the survival of the republic. And so I think that the message is getting where it is supposed to get, to the extent that whether you like it or not, change is around the corner. And as a matter of fact, there are glimpses. There are some police, for example, institutions in different cities and what have you, which have in fact begun making something akin to fundamental reforms. There are some states, some cities and what have you, that have embarked on that same program. So I think that at the end of the day, it has really been something very interesting. And one of the things that I think make this country great is that it realizes the fact of the matter is that society is not static, it is dynamic. Yeah, when people raise their voices, the leaders have to respond and make sure that some of the requests are implemented. As a matter of fact, you have to understand also, let's face it, again, this is an election year. You almost have 4 to 5 months to the election, November 3rd.
Let's go to Isaac Obira. He says it's very clear that when the United States declared the universal human rights to all American people, the whites expected black people to remain as slaves, while only they, the white, enjoyed the freedom. Your take on that?
Yeah, I think some ignorant whites might have thought like that, but I think that those who were socially and politically conscious probably knew better. Because, Paul, as I say often, society is not static, it is dynamic. And when you think about democracy, democracy is a work in progress. And I think that when you talk about the Republic of the United States of America, I don't think that there is anybody who can claim that the United States of America as a republic or as a union is perfect. On the contrary, it is not perfect. But there are efforts every now and then to make it a much more perfect union. And I think what is happening is part of the process. Because when you talk about change, change is neither an incident nor an event. It is a process. Black people, as we noted some time back, were not really human beings when the first American Constitution came on board. They were, in fact, characterized as property. But as we know, you had the Civil War in the 1860s and what have you. And the 1860s was, in fact, for the most part, fought about the issue of slavery because the southern states wanted to retain that privileged type of lifestyle. And they eventually lost the war. You are beginning to see that loss manifested in some of the statues, which are in fact being brought down. The statue, for example, of the rebel commander of the essentially the states, the Confederate states,
Right.
Robert E. Lee,
Right.
was brought down.
Yeah, I actually saw that statue being taken down very close to where I live. I happened to be driving around and I saw that.
Robert E. Lee.
Yes, in Old Town Alexandria.
Yeah, that's the man that was the commander of the forces of the Confederate States. And that is the man that, in fact, formerly surrendered to General Ulysses Grant, who was the commander of the Union Army, and the great president at that time, Abraham Lincoln. And you know, even for example, the statue of Jefferson Davis, the rebel president of the Confederate State, was also brought down.
Right. And even across Europe, you have King Leopold in Belgium being taken down. One of the people that you always reference when you're talking about Rhodesia, Cecil Rhodes. I think they're going to take down his statue too from Oxford University, if they haven't taken it down.
They are actually not going to take it down, Paul. They actually brought it down.
There you
and
go.
That is the second time that you have that statue being brought down, because the first one was brought down around Cape Town University several years ago by students. And you know, he got a lot of money from diamonds and gold of South Africa and put a huge grant at Oxford University. A grant was supposed to train future leaders.
And they have, to their
future
credit.
Leaders, but at the time, really, it was designed to train future leaders who would help to continue with the status quo. Mind you, at the time, you had Great Britain, which presided over where the sun never set.
Interesting.
And so, for example, you have in the United States, you have a man who was president of the United States, Bill Clinton, is a former Rhodes Scholar.
Right.
You have Susan Rice.
Right.
President, Barack Obama as a national security advisor and one time permanent representative to the United Nations, Susan Rice.
It's been where the elite
Oxford,
go.
was a Rhodes Scholar.
Right, right.
And you have my friend from Zambia, Dr. Kenneth Mwenda,
right.
was also a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford.
Well, and for that one, maybe rightly so, because I think they were paying back for what they stole from them.
I think that you have a point, Paul. As a matter of fact, I have often said that if there is anybody who should, in fact, be the beneficiary of the Rhodes scholarships, it should be the daughters and the sons of Southern Africa, especially what was Rhodesia, and we are talking about Zambia and Zimbabwe and South Africa, the Republic of South Africa. Interesting, isn't it?
Very interesting times, Shaka. Let's go to Nana Petra. Until Black Lives Matter, no life matters. For example, at least in the United States, there are conversations about race and how black people are treated. But I challenge you to go anywhere in Europe and have similar conversations. For example, the United States has had a period where they had the civil rights movement. So they have something to build on. But in Europe, they have never had a civil rights movement, and blacks are still treated in most cases as slaves, and black people can't rise up to lead organizations or to be in very powerful positions across Europe.
Now, you definitely do make a great point, and I have often talked about how, for example, as far as I'm concerned, when you look at the racial dynamics in the United States and compare and contrast them with what happens, for example, in Europe, I often say, and I even said recently, very, very recently, that contrary to those who say that the United States is the single most racist country on this planet Earth, I object to that. In fact, I say that on the contrary, the United States happens to be the most racially conscious nation on this planet Earth. So I think you make my point, Nana.
Interesting. Let's go to another comment. Let's go to Tayan Kong. The blacks must realize that the level of dependency will never help our day to live like we are respected citizens. Let's just consider that those who have studied like the whites have gained knowledge and do better like what a person can do. Hence, my advice to fellow African Americans is maybe to start looking of ways to develop the mother continent.
Tian, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that most efforts really, at least for Africans, perhaps in collaboration with the African diaspora, should go towards significant fundamental transformation of the African continent. We need to liberate the African continent to start making great things happen. And I think we should go towards realizing the dreams, for example, of some of the key founding fathers of Africa.
It would be remiss if we didn't mention the passing of Burundian President Pierre who passed away. Our thoughts and prayers go to his family. I want to get a quick reaction. You know Pierre Nkurunziza, you've met him before. Some people, you have mixed reactions coming up after it was announced that he had passed on. I just wanted to get your thoughts as maybe we move to the next topic.
Yeah, he was a man, of course, who loved the beautiful game, football. And in fact, I do have reliable information that he one time, in fact, played the beautiful game with someone that you and I know, and that is a man from Tanzania who happens to be our colleague at the Voice of America by the name Ndugu Mwamoyo Hamza. They played some football.
Interesting.
The president himself told me when I actually met him in 2016, downtown Bujumbura. And he was an interesting man, and he was very, very young. He's a man that tried his best under the most difficult circumstances that Burundi has really undergone through. I don't know exactly what was the cause of death.
They say he died of cardiac arrest.
They say he died of cardiac arrest, but you know, it is also said that it could in fact have been the coronavirus.
Yeah, I've not been able to verify that, but it could possibly be true.
Yeah, it is quite possible because, as you know, the coronavirus likes people who have pre-existing conditions, like for example, heart ailment. If you have a bad heart, you have experiences of, for example, diabetes. You have those types of situations. I got it from a very reliable source, for example, that he had a very high cholesterol.
Yeah.
When you have very high cholesterol, it is something apparently that could affect your heart.
One could also argue that he was very healthy. He was always playing football.
As a matter of fact, I am even told that before he actually got into a bad situation so that he was able to be taken to the hospital, he had in fact been playing volleyball. There are also some people who are suggesting that he may in fact have been a victim of poison, and that this poison may have come somewhere from the region. I do not have the facts really to substantiate that type of allegation. So I think we'll have to wait and see what the autopsy says and what the official reason is, and we'll go by that. But as you said, may his soul rest in eternal peace.
You've called him a remarkable example of what Africa is capable of. The Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, he just endorsed a proposal for him to stay in power a little bit longer than expected, citing COVID and what, and so he's bought into this idea of wanting to extend his term beyond the constitutional mandate. Your thoughts?
I really don't know the whole story. I haven't done my adequate homework on that. But I still regard Abiy Ahmed as one of those that I would characterize as a new breed of African leaders. And I hope that whatever he does not disappoint me, nor does he disappoint the people of Ethiopia or the people of the African continent. But I think that he has done well so far. He should be a little bit patient. He has at least demonstrated to us that he is not a sort of power-hungry sort of ruler or leader. I think that he should definitely come up with some kind of, intermediate solution, something that can mitigate the situation until they can actually hold elections. And that the sort of elections they are actually going to hold should not be selections, or should not be the type of events that are only used to merely take the people of Ethiopia in what I would call the motions.
Shaka, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
You're most welcome, Ndugu Paul.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Take care for now.